Welcome to the Consumer Code Show, where we believe that humans are incredible and we are living in a first era in history where behavioral data and AI have hit scale so we can go from consumer insight to business activation in no time. In this show, we explore the world of retail through the lens of demography, cartography, ethnography, and the economy. So without further ado, let's get into this episode. Today, I am joined by Gregg Katz, who I met when he was a chief strategy officer at the Shopping Center Group. He spent time also at RetailStat as the head of product and is now the director of real estate at Esri and a self-proclaimed location data nerd. Welcome, Gregg.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm excited about this. You and I talk shop all the time. I feel like I learn from you, and a lot of people, I feel like you're so good at understanding the technical side of our industry and being able to also translate over that to the business side. So I think people are really in for a treat here. I want to start. Usually I start off in people's background. I want to start this off in a bit of a different place here, and it's way in the past. So you write. A portion of your newsletter is called Nostalgic Retail Series. And what prompted you to start writing about some of these old retailers?
Well, so you actually are going to make me answer a little bit by including my past a little bit. I grew up in a retail family, and my family owned a catalog showroom business here in Atlanta, and it had grown to 8 or 9 stores and then branched into the Carolinas. And so I thought I was going into the retail business as kind of the family business. And that was going to be my destiny. Like the whole family was in it. Nephews, nieces, uncles, aunts, the whole deal. And my senior year of high school, we sold out to Service Merchandise. And Service Merchandise to me was one of the iconic retailers of the past. And I always found myself comparing some of what was happening over time in these last several years to what used to go on. And so I started, we'd have these conversations with friends and coworkers, et cetera. And I'd say, hey, back then they used to, and it just dawned on me, like there's so much nostalgia, but there's also so many lessons learned from all of this.
Yeah.
And so it was interesting in our discussion. So why not, branch it out further? And it's funny because I get a lot of input from the folks on LinkedIn to add other retailers, and it teaches me some stuff that I didn't even know as I do my research on the retailers. But then it also shows a lot of interesting commonalities and kind of puts the past into the both the present and what could possibly be in the future.
Yeah. And I want to dig into that because there's this concept of, oh, it's another one of those. Even in, 2025 and, AI is the big topic, there's still the same kind of stuff happening in retail. Have you found any patterns that have surfaced about writing about all these nostalgic retailers that you feel like is still relevant today?
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of interesting ones. One is that it seems like expanding too quickly is always an interesting one, and where concepts want to, for various reasons, and they may be different reasons, but they just want to blow it out. And in a lot of cases, they do it either before they have their foundation fully set, which causes a lot of growing pains, right? Or they do it in response to, investment from private equity or venture capital or whatever the case may be. And I just think that rapid expansion is usually a sign of either quick trouble or leading up to having those challenges that come from that growth and the need to stay profitable or become profitable or whatever the case may be. I think the other is where concepts move away from their core, what made them who they are, and then they start feeling like maybe they've matured, and when they mature out, all right, then they need to start looking at additional ways to gain revenue or gain market share. And so, the one that I always use as an example is, McDonald's was a burger place, right? It was burger, burger, burger. It started running into more difficulties as its up and downs over its career, as it moved into chicken and
Mm-hmm.
salads and, be who you are, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. And you may have to find ways to innovate, but that doesn't always mean you have to go way outside of what you know in your core. And so I think that that kind of showed itself. And I think the last one was how people look at competition. And you and I have talked a lot about this in the past. And who you think your competitor is may not be who your competitor is. And I think you
Sure.
have that narrow lens of, oh, we have to watch out, going again, use the McDonald's example. Oh, we have to watch out for Burger King. Well, you might also have to watch out for a Whole Foods who has this prepared food section that, people are choosing instead of going to, eat at your restaurant or whatever the case may be. And so I think you have to look outside your lens of what is and who's my competition, and really look at, who can attack you from different angles. And I think that's where a lot of retailers got into trouble as well.
Yeah, man, that's so good. Few things come to mind. I'm thinking about the competitive insights here. I'm seeing the outdoor goods industry, like tactical outdoor goods, getting eat up by athleisure right now. And I wonder when they're going to see it, because it's like there's like a job to be done by the consumer. And then there's people that will wear outdoor goods, but they'll wear it like I wear it, like just I got a pair of outdoor goods pants and I wear it into board meetings, right? But that
Right.
can be that job to be done can be switched by an athleisure, and it's like whatever job to be done the consumer's trying to do. The other thing that I'm thinking about right now, and I'm wondering how you stand on, how you think about or stand on it, is I think about Sweetgreen when I think about expanding too fast. Do you think they're falling into that similar trap here, where they're PE back, trying to move too fast, or just not a profitable economic model?
Yeah, and I think that they started trying, and maybe the PE had a lot to do with it, but they were trying to also experiment in ways that I didn't always find made sense. That getting more robotic and getting more tech oriented, kind of from back of house and even to a certain degree front of house. And I think they lost a little bit of who they were when they first started. And I think, to somebody's got to pay for all that. And so when you start doing a lot of this changes, it's costing money. Obviously, the price of goods goes over to the consumer. And I think the consumers reached a point and said, it's salad, in
Yeah.
essence, right? Or, and like there's only so far this can go. And there's a, then there you always have the copycats. I always looking back, I first kind of came to this conclusion, and it was really around Five Guys. I saw Five Guys come into the market here in Atlanta, and I was still a broker at the time. And soon as Five Guys established itself and just successful as hell, and just, going crazy and all over Georgia for that matter, all of a sudden here come all the copycats, right?
Mm,
Different variations on it, right? So the market matures super fast because of that,
mhm,
right? And there's competitors that some will be on price, some will be on quality, some will be on both, some will be on a different take to the concept. And then all of a sudden you've got this mature market, and how do you separate yourself? And I
mhm.
think that's where, in my opinion, that's where Sweet Green started to go wrong. And I just think you have to have an advantage in something, price, quality, something. And in their case, I think they started losing the advantage.
Yeah, yeah. I'm starting to develop the most unglamorous theory of retail success, and I call it the don't die theory. And the whole thing is, um, you just run a financially sound business, and then you just wait for your competitors, your PE-backed competitors, to go belly up, and you eat up their market share. And I'll give you two examples. Hobby Lobby recently gained 13% market share over the past 3 years. Why did they gain most of it? They ate up a lot of Joann's customers. Now I don't know why Joann went belly up. I don't know the history. I do know they're PE backed. I'm wondering if that has something to do with it. Though also I've seen Timu just like wipe out folks for a second, and then they got their tax loophole closed, quit advertising, and then all of a sudden you see Five Below and Family Dollar just go boom, and it's
Right.
just you just stuck around, you kept doing what you were doing, you were financially sound, especially in the case of Hobby Lobby, super financially sound, slow mover, I guess, comparatively, and just ride that wave of those folks going belly up.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of the 80-20 rule too, right? 20% of your customers, typically are going to be the 80% revenue generators, right? And it's, if you know how to hold on to them and keep them, don't worry so much about growing them. Like you said, you'll get some growth from those that make mistakes along the way, and those that fail to learn, fail to keep up, all those, different scenarios. And, add in an economic environment that's uncertain as hell, and there you go.
Yeah, okay, we gotta put a pin in. I don't know if we'll be able to go back to this, but the 80/20 around keeping your customers, you just opened up a huge can of worms on the KPIs for retail, and we just can't go there right now, but we'll see if we can get back. Okay, I want the audience to know how Gregg became Gregg, and you're gonna reveal something to me that I don't even know about. You were the CEO, I just know this because of LinkedIn. You were the CEO of a franchise chain of burrito restaurants, and then you moved into retail real estate. Like, give me, like, how did that happen?
So I had been in the move from retail into restaurant, had been in the restaurant industry in various capacities for years, and then got the crazy idea, okay, I can do this, right? I don't, I should just try and do it. And so the short version is that I actually signed up with a concept that was considered to be the first fast casual concept out there. It's the founder of fast casual, and the concept was called Zuzu, Z-U, and Zuzu was handmade Mexican food. So it was, you go to the counter, you place your order. We would do it, to order, prepare the food. And then, we'd bring it out to your table at that time, with the little table tent with your number, and we'd bring it out to your table. I signed up to be a franchisee and had in the Central Florida market, was going to develop 8 to 10 stores and so forth and so on. And or while I was signing up and going through this, unbeknownst to me, they made a deal with Arby's, and Arby's acquired a majority stake in them and decided that they needed to be more like a Taco Bell than what they were. And I remember, hadn't even opened my first unit. I literally went to visit the prototype for this new thing that Arby's had come up with, and was like, I'm in a world of trouble. This isn't going to
Oh
work.
my.
This is like, what am I going to do? And I was newly married and starting the career, so to speak. And I'm like, this is not good. So to make it, to fast forward, I actually broke off with some legal action and broke off from the scenario, while being able to retain the ability to have a restaurant that semi competed. But what we did is we literally spent a week behind closed doors planning, shut down for 2 days, reconcepted everything, and became Out of Hand Burrito Stand, and it became my restaurant group. And so we ended up opening several restaurants in the Orlando area. And believe it or not, the shopping center group of Florida, because they weren't all one big organization at the time. They had like little, like almost like franchisees, but they weren't. But the shopping center group of Florida was who helped me with my site selection.
Wow.
And I, my favorite part of the restaurant business was, a, by like rush time, where everything's going crazy, because I just love making sense out of the chaos and serving the customers and getting everything done and all that. But the second part for me was the site selection and the planning and the strategy and all of that. So each restaurant was independently financed. I had investors in different, so each one was a separate company, each one was separately financed. And I was burnt out. It was killing me.
Hmm.
And I didn't see a path to, either I had to grow it with some more capital and get up to a point where I could sell it, or I had to franchise it, or I had to something, because I was too small to be big, too big to be small, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
I ended up deciding to sell, and I actually sold the last restaurant the day before 9/11 hit, which was very, very lucky. It closed the day
Yeah.
before 9/11. Very lucky, because in the end of the day, it probably would have changed everything, and it wouldn't have been able to
Sure. Yeah, everybody
close
got
it, et
spooked
cetera.
after, yeah.
So as I was doing that, I said, I want to do something on the real estate side, because that was fun. It was fun for me to look at all that strategy, and look at how we were selecting sites and what made a good one, what made a bad one, and look at where my competition was. And so that's what got me to the shopping center group. And that's kind of how that transition started. It was really going through that process. And I mean, back then we were with paper maps in the car with dots on the maps, and really
Yeah.
looking at stuff, and really local market knowledge, and the amount of information that broker conveyed to me and help set the strategy. It was cool. It was just really fun to be a part of on the other side. So that's what attracted me of it.
I mean, I feel like that understanding that story gives me a lot of context of the character of Gregg, which is really cool. Tell me about, as you got into TSCG, the shopping center group, where did you start? And then I want you to take people to where you ended up, which is where I met you as a chief strategy officer.
Yeah, I started as a tenant rep. So I was working with, because of my background, a lot of restaurant clients, some
You
grocery
got it.
clients.
Yeah, you understood what it was like.
Exactly. And in addition, just so happened a lot of franchisees at the time. This was when Raving Brands, which was the founder of Moe's and some other fast food concepts, was based in Atlanta. And so they had a huge franchise network, and I was working with a lot of them. And other groups and other chains. Believe it or not, my biggest client was AT&T, of all things. It didn't fit my background, but nonetheless. And so I worked as a tenant rep for about 5 or 6 years. I knew For me, I knew I needed to try to do a little something different, because then the Great Recession hit, and I'll never forget. I was leaving a physical with my doctor. I pulled out of the parking lot to get a call from AT&T telling me all deals are on hold, and I just was like, "Oh my god, my entire income stream for, the next 12 months is gone," right? And so that up and down of the brokerage business, you have to have thick skin, and you really have to be able to take the ups and downs. And so it kind of made me realize maybe this wasn't, the broker side wasn't for me, as much as I enjoyed it and learned a lot, and hopefully felt like I contributed a lot. And so I give credit to our co-CEOs at TSCG, because they saw in me something on the way I was using data and information and technology, and I think they also sensed my urgent need to actually make money. And so they literally offered me a role. They called me in one day and just said, "We think we need to do more on the data and technology and information side. We don't know what that is. Go and think about this. Let's talk next week and figure this all out," right? And I came back and said, "I think that there is something here, and here's kind of what's in my head." And they said, "We love it." And I said, "The only thing I need is a commitment from the shopping center group that you guys will invest in this and not have this be a fly by night thing. This is going to be a process. It's going to take a lot." And again, to their credit, they were 100% in, 100% behind it, could not have been more supportive of, "We need to do this organizationally." And at the time, there was no role models out there to look at this and say, who else is doing this kind of thing and had a dedicated technology role in retail real estate, and how do we make this work? And so kind of figured it out as we went along. While that sounds risky, I think it allowed us to be innovative and get in front of everything, and really kind of set the bar and create the reputation around the shopping center group, that not only do we have the best brokers out there, but that we had the best use of data and technology out there. And I think that was a big starting point. It grew into something really special. And so I think as it grew, it also afforded me an opportunity to, move through the organization into that chief strategy officer role, where really the only difference at the time with what I was doing was it A, gave it a seat at the table with leadership, which, so technology, data, and information, and B, it gave more ability to expand out the strategy part to the organizational side of things. And so we
Mhm.
looked at implementing a lot of strategies with people and organization, and how we were going to move forward from a business perspective. And I got to be involved with a lot of that, which was really.
Yeah, that's cool. And then our interactions came through you built out the analytics arm of TSCG. And just a little anecdote, I don't know if you remember this, but I've mentioned this to you before, you were one of the first people that believed in us early. And I don't know, it was at ICSC Research Connections in Miami. We started working with you, and then you grabbed the back of my head like this, and you got close and you said, "I'm going to be your biggest pain in the ass customer. But if you do well, I am also going to be your biggest advocate." And you absolutely were both of those things. You were tough on us in the beginning, and you helped us understand what we created. And you believed in us early, and we've kind of released more data sets since then. I really appreciate that about you. Now I understand why you were like that, because you were an entrepreneur as well. Like, you got that 100%.
Yeah, and I also think it's about recognizing when there's something that's going to work, or can work, right? And I think when we met early on, it was obvious that you were onto something. And, the problem, not problem, the challenge I think that's out there for a lot of the startups in this space is showing value, right? And showing value in this sea of data and information and all of that. And I think a lot of times people stretch what these solutions can and can't do. But I always found you to be eager to learn, eager to understand, eager to, perfect what you were working on. And I think we, as you know, and as you said, we used it very, very early on. And I knew we were onto something when we have to stop for a minute and educate the client. And then the client's like, wow, and like you see the expression on their face, like not only do we get it, but this is going to be good. Right. And that happened over and over again. There was only, there's a few data sets and a few, informational and platforms that's happened for. And I think it was obvious, not to mention we were in a very iconic sentence where I think I went a little too far with another platform, the intent was to prop you up, which I hopefully did a good job of.
In another data set that you saw very early was mobile data. And I don't know, because we weren't really even in the market then. But my understanding from other people is that you guys were one of the first folks to really put mobile data in action at TSCG, using it for trade area analysis, et cetera. At what point did you realize mobile data was going to become a thing? And just give me your journey with it.
So it was around 2013, 2014, somewhere in there.
Okay,
And
that's really early.
it was really early. And there was a company called AirSage, and AirSage was using cellular ping data. They were based, or at least the people I talked to were based in Atlanta, and at the time only had two cell phone providers, and they were T-Mo and Sprint. And back then, it was when Verizon and AT&T were like everything, right? And so these were these
Mm-hmm.
little upstart. So they didn't have a ton of data, from providers that didn't have a high subscriber base, and it was cellular tower based, which was inaccurate as hell.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The premise of it was super interesting, and so we tried to figure out, could we implement AirSage data into our analysis at TSCG, and how could we do it? That's where it started. And then as we realized there is something to this, A, if we can afford it, right? Because the early data was obvious, as anything is super expensive. And B, is if we could explain it, and that was the other piece that was going to be difficult, and get buy-in from those we were explaining to, that yes, this makes a difference and here's how. And we went through multiple providers, and as we went through each provider, we found some things that got better and we found some things
Mm-hmm.
that got worse. We found
Mm-hmm.
promises and expectations that were met and not met, but we kept blending it into our analysis. And it just was, as we kept saying, and the way we described it back then, it's like, when you put a radius ring or a drive time around something, you're assuming everyone in there is your customer, right? Because that's the only way you can do it. And I said, mobile data gave you the chance to pull pieces of the puzzle out, and what you're left with is more actual, your trade area and your data and your customer and your information is coming from more visitation and actual visitation. And so we eventually found our way to Placer. We're very, very, very early customer Placers, and we're manually taking stuff from Placer and bringing it into the Esri platform, which is what we based everything off of, and mixing it with your data, mixing it with other data sets. And we were experimenting around and really found a niche as an early adopter, and it really started to put us on the radar and allowed us to further our analytics platform both internally, but then we started offering it externally as well. And the TSCG Analytics was formed, and that allowed for us to provide services non-brokerage related that were
Mm-hmm.
more just data and analysis related, and started competing in that arena. And it was working well, and it just gave us that foray into mobile data. My biggest argument with mobile data, as you remember probably back in the day, is this stuff was being marketed out, but never educating the
Mm-hmm.
customers and the users of how to correctly use it and not use it. And so we went through this evolution of everybody wanted to get it, but nobody knew what to do with it, or correctly knew what to do with it, right? And so people were using it to make decisions that they had no business using it for, and they were using it as a single data point, and they had no business doing that either. And so, I think as we've matured out in this industry with it, people have become more educated as to where the fine, where the lines are with the data. It's still being an essential part of the analysis.
I kind of picture you in this uphill battle in the beginning, both dealing with the immaturity of the data set early on, and then you're pushing it, and then all of a sudden, like, something breaks and everyone starts using it, and then you're in the opposite edge. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, guys, like, you got to be careful. And then you have to deal with the immaturity of the education on how to use it. And I feel like you shepherded the data well through that, which I definitely appreciated from you.
Well, you said it exactly correctly, and I think I would have thought, just looking back, I would have thought the harder part would have been that initial shepherding of like, this is what this is, and et cetera. It actually proved to be the second part that you mentioned, which is once it got out there, it was kind of like trying to, whoa, time out, slow down, and because people wanted instant insights and instant answers and, still do, but that was an easy way in their minds to get it. And so having to convince people to slow down in their decision making and ask those questions, it became interesting.
I'd love to hear a few maybe anecdotes, because we haven't really talked about your time at Retail Stat, but you built a mobile data product, as well as there's definitely other CRE related things in there. But I'd love to hear some retail insight stories that you had in that sort of era of your life, where you're able to show a retailer something that they may not have expected about a trade area, or change the way they think about their customers.
Yeah, I mean, there's two that come to mind. One is there was a large sporting goods retailer that was adamant and turned a site down in real estate committee and was adamant that would cannibalize their existing store in the area, right? And so we had done some significant analysis around it, but then we brought in some other data sets and took a real hard look at this and said, is it really cannibalizing? Because our brokers, again, that local market knowledge, boots on the ground, were adamant that, they don't see it that way. And so let's see if we can get the data to back up, what you're saying. And it did back it up. We ran a big analysis, and a big part of it was consumer movement and mobile data. A big part of it was who the customer was and persona, and looking at that. And what we ended up finding was that there was, I mean, when I say minimal, like, percent or two potential cannibalization, but that it opened up this whole other area of residences that could frequent these stores, and they capture a part of the market they don't have. And it went back to real estate committee and was approved eventually. And so we had turned a no into a yes. I think, to me, saying no or turning yeses into nos is where you really get credibility, because you're saying don't do that, here's why. And
Mhm.
especially if you're a broker. But I think in this case, there was such a the data, so it was so obvious in terms of the data showing this. And you taken a dead set no, this is not going to happen, and all of a sudden few months later, they're back in real estate committee saying, absolutely, we were wrong. Let's do it. Right. And it shows a lot about the retailer, but it also, and about the broker and the broker's persistence, et cetera. So that one I always found cool, because it was dead in the water. And, and it actually, because it's an anchor, it changed that trade area
Yeah, that
tremendously. Right.
totally changes the
Yeah. And
community.
so that was awesome. And then the other one that comes to mind was a furniture retailer that was looking to expand and came to us and said, our customer is, and I'm going to get it off a little bit, but our customer is, you know, predominantly female, 18 to 35, upper middle income, usually Caucasian, blah, 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 blah. Right. And so we started doing a lot of work with the data, and we started to see something very, very different. And it ended up that the question was about opening another location actually here in the Atlanta market. And we said, wait a minute, first of all, everything we see shows your MVP customers are Hispanic, male and female, lower middle income, so forth and so on. It was like night and day, right? And they were speechless. And the CEO of the shopping center group used to say that he felt like back then, and 80-90% of retailers don't know their customer. They think they
Mhm,
do, but they
mhm.
don't. And I used to say, I think that, I don't know, but this was one of those cases where their lens and what they saw every day was just, it's like when you buy a Honda and then all of a sudden you see 1,000 Hondas on the road when you never noticed it before, right? And it's the same thing. Their lens was not looking at what reality was necessarily. And so once they did, it changed everything in terms of what they were thinking about site
Yes,
selection and where they
100%.
wanted to go. And so that change in strategy was meaningful and directed by both the data and, again, boots on the ground kind of combining with it, and it changed the strategy and made some different decisions for them, and it really worked well as it progressed going forward.
That's so great for the retailer too in this particular situation because they're probably fighting for Class A real estate when in reality, the people that they're doing really well with are not near that Class A real estate. So to me, that's a key unlock where you just got a whole bunch more cheaper inventory that you're going to do really well. And that's also awesome for the community too to be able to have that inventory filled with something that makes sense.
Absolutely,
Net better with everybody.
absolutely. And so I think when you see, the meaningful, like, ahas are always where what stuck with me, right? Where, whether it was a landlord, a retailer, whoever, when they would just like, holy cow, like this, okay, I see it. It makes sense. It's not what I thought, but it makes sense. And then they act on it, right? And those were always that's why that storytelling to get to the actionable insights, that's what I loved about and love about doing all of this. It's just, that's that little like light bulb that goes off.
Yeah. I want to kind of do a little peek towards 2026 or maybe just even the current. So you were able to kind of get a feel for where things were moving back then. What do you feel like is the most important retail shift happening right now that almost nobody is preparing for in CRE?
So I think the one that I keep harping on is the aging of America, the aging in general, but I'm going to stick with the US, the aging of the US.
Hmm.
And, you know, I know you saw the, recent ICSC report on Gen X and the Gen X spending propensity. I've always talked about the boomers and Gen X and how their spending and their spending power is is greater than the other generations, but also as everybody ages up, how that's going to kind of stay that way and how they're kind of spending on both sides. They're spending up for parents and they're spending down for kids. And
Mm.
I think
Hmm.
I think that this need to look at that customer or customer sets is just not out there, and it's just overshadowed, and I guess it's because it's not sexy or it's not, whatever, both from a like health perspective and med tail, if you want to call it that, right? And how that's going to evolve, but from everything around that population, it's just, how they work, how they play, how they live, all of that. It just doesn't get enough attention, I don't think, today.
Yeah. That's an interesting thought that they're spending up now. Right? Because we've been so focused on boomers for good reason, and we still really know we should be focused on them. But I do think because the Gen X is spinning up, I do think it's worth a second look at them in particular. And there's a lot of argument on how you define Gen X and the popular definition of Gen X that has them essentially as a smaller cohort of the American population. It just really depends on how you define it. But I even think about I'm not Gen X, I'm a millennial, but I am in my parents are older, so mid 70s. And I'm going to have a conversation with my dad today about how does retirement look for you and in what ways do I need to make sure that I'm taking care of my dad. Does that make sense? And it's like
No,
this
absolutely.
is
And
something that's on Gen X's mind.
absolutely. So I am Gen X, but I think what we're looking at, right, is like you said, as your parents and the boomer generation continues to age and age out, but they're also living longer because healthcare's better, technology's better, et cetera. So as you've got that, and then you've got the X's moving into that phase of retirement and getting ready to start that journey, right? But they're dealing with health and or other issues, income issues for, the boomers. And then, on the other side, they've got kids who jokingly will never leave the house, right? Because of the economic environment that was and is and all of this stuff. And so, you find a lot more support going both ways. And I think with that, yes, these other generations significantly influence these purchases without question, but I think that kind of goes to the flattening to a certain degree of these generations in terms of how they shop, what they shop, et cetera, right? Because I think you see more blending as this starts to happen and as people influence each other, but also shop for each other in a
Yes.
lot of respects.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what's maybe some practical ways that maybe retailers or commercial real estate folks can have it on their radar? Is it like, do they just need to be paying a little bit closer attention to the lifetime value of Gen Xers if you're a retailer, or do they need to be looking closer at the trade areas of Gen Xers? What is a practical way of thinking about that?
I mean, to me, it's a couple things. One, it's looking at if you're only development and construction and all all of that side. To me, it's looking more at placemaking for one,
Mm-hmm.
and how you create this community and how it's changing because you're going to have boomers, maybe coming back and living with the Xers and the Xers still having the millennials at home and or even Gen Zs at home and et cetera, right? And so I think a little bit of that, right? And really focus more on placemaking. I also think it's and being more methodical in the decision making around place, meaning how do we make it so that it is attractive and or useful for the younger generations but also the older generations, right? And not just on the sense of you know elevators and versus stairs and things like that, but more even just again around the holistic place. And I think the other is really understanding, and whether it's using your data, whether it's whatever data, but understanding how these influences kind of go across generations
Mm-hmm.
and stop and realizing that you can focus your whatever your marketing efforts, your inventory and retail and product efforts to attract that customer and keep them in your wanting to come back into your store while still getting these other ones, the other generations.
Yeah. Yeah, there was that lady, I think that you quoted, I can't remember her name in one of your articles that you coined the term perennial.
Hmm.
So it's someone that made their purchases it may be across generations, or they may purchase in a fashion that you would not expect from that generation. And I remember making a choice early on when we were building the persona live segmentation, because we could have gone, there's a segmentation called Axiom Personix that does hard cuts on demographics. And it's like, if you are in a segment that's 35 to 45, you're in that segment and you can't do anything about it. Your demographics will put you there. And we actually allow people that are a little bit older may fall into a younger segment if they're living in an area that's younger and behaving in that way, or just plain behaving in that way. And I think that could be one of the operational ways, is like focusing. And it's a little bit harder because it's harder to get through in a real estate meeting, because it's easy to just talk about age. You know what I mean? But when you can start talking about the interests, because there are interests obviously that span across generations, health being one of them,
Absolutely.
that there's some utility there.
Well, and so it's like instead of talking, demographics at a high level for sure, right? And getting some of that core information and to your point, as you start, narrowing down the funnel to get more information on the customer, it's got to go beyond that, right? It's got to go beyond just core demographics and the more you can figure out about these commonalities, the better, right? And the better decisions you can make. And I think that's one of the beauties of your data, but also just in general how people are starting to look at everything. And I think people are realizing that it is about the right customer versus the customer, right? And so, which, not to deviate, but kind of goes back to mobile data is great to define opportunity, visitation, but that's all it's going to define, right? It's going to define opportunity. It's not, it's, you don't know if they transacted, they didn't transact. So
Hmm.
you've got to go deeper than that, right? Yes, it may show you your trade area. Yes, it may show very beneficial, but you got to go deeper and you've got to understand who the customer is and are they the right customer and where are
Yep.
they and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah. So if you're a listener listening to this, Greg and I have talked about mobile data. We've talked about demographics. We've talked a little bit about psychographics. And you might be feeling, my gosh, this is too much. Too much stuff to look at. And Greg, you actually wrote a really good article on this called "Dealing with the Data Deluge." By the way, Greg's newsletter on LinkedIn. It's called The Corner of Main and Main. It's really good. It includes the nostalgic retail, but also some of his thoughts on this industry in general. But I'm going to read from your article. I just want to have you react to this. So in your article, you write, if every data set has the answer, then what exactly is the issue? So how do CRE teams deal with this deluge of data that is available to them? Like how do they sort through it all?
Yeah, and I think it's a couple of things. The industry has always thrived on FOMO, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what do I need to do? How did they get this deal and I didn't? Or how did they transact and I didn't? And or choose this site, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think that leads to making decisions before you on data and things because you saw somebody else use it,
Mm-hmm.
that make a decision that you need this data before you even know what questions you're going to ask, right?
Mm.
And I think if you back that up, and I understand the FOMO completely, we're all competitive and we all want to, make sure we have the latest and the greatest, but you've got to figure out what you're trying to get. What are the questions and what are you trying to answer? Then search for the right data, right? And then search for the right methodology around the data. That's why I hate black boxes, right? Where nobody will talk about what goes into their algorithm and all this stuff, because then you're relying on the fact that that person's or that company's algorithm is going to meet your needs, and it's not. It's going to be generic, right, across the board. And so you've got to understand those questions. Once you have the questions, then you can go search for the data. And if it's persona data, if it's mobile data, if it's a transaction data, and I think it's become obvious that one data set, despite what some marketing will try and tell you otherwise, one data set won't do it for you anymore, or almost never. It's really a combination, and it's the way I always talk about it is it's like you're creating a recipe and you need different ingredients, right? And your recipe for how you cook, I don't know, chicken parmesan, don't ask me why I thought of that, but chicken parmesan may be different than my recipe, right? We have different ingredients. They may both be very, very good at the end, right? And they may, whoever you serve it to may love it, whoever I serve it to may love it, but they're going to be different. And I think that's the key here. Just because everybody's using it doesn't mean it's right for you or right for your organization. So I think you have to reverse the pattern. And the companies and the CRE companies that do that and ask these questions before they offer up data sets or solutions, those are the ones that I tend to look at and listen to versus the ones that market that they're the next great thing and that you just should be using your data. And when you ask why, the answer is almost because, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's just not going to cut it today. It's got to be, I like hearing when a data provider says, this may not work for you, but here's what it can do. Here's what it can't do. Here's what it should be used for. Here's what it shouldn't. That's when you can trust the data provider and what the outputs are going to be.
I love the organizing principle of centering this on what questions that you're trying to answer, because it's taking you back to something that was true before any of the data ever existed. These are questions that people have always been asking about retail real estate, and you're sort of like you're using the data as it should be used as a tool rather than something that you can hold up and say you have something new. But there's the you have a really good quote in a different article, and I'm going to follow it up with here. I don't know if I want to read the whole quote, but the quote is essentially like people will focus on a singular metric and really get zeroed in on that. And you're talking about embracing dynamic location analytics, where you're layering a lot of this stuff and then you're triangulating it. Okay, I love that. But if you're the person on the other side of that dashboard, what's the best way to combine it all? Is it a dashboard? Like, what does that look like? What have you seen to be successful to help someone triangulate all these things at once rather than going to over here or looking at this Excel spreadsheet? Or is just like, do you got to munch through it?
I think it depends. I think it depends. Obviously, it's a resource question as well, right? Because it's the old "you can afford anything but not everything," right? And so that aside, I have seen some aggregation using platforms like where I work with, from an Esri perspective, right, where they use Esri as the catch-all and storytell through the map or storytell through you know a dashboard of some form, that works, an infographic, something like that, right? And I've seen some other organizations, some data organizations do a really good job of that as well. I think the hard part is, in a lot of cases, is data is hard to it's hard for it to all talk to each other, right? I mean, the formatting or just what it shows and how it shows it. And so sometimes you do have to bring it together and piecemeal it, right? And that's not easy. Like I said, back in the day when we first started working with this, that's what we were doing. We were piecemealing the data together. But I think as long as you have a place to where you can capture it and then start to query it, and this is where again I think AI can help. I don't think AI is the answer for this, but I think AI can help with the querying in terms of getting it done faster with larger data sets, right? And but I do think that it is getting all of that data into a central repository as best as you can, or being able to reach out and grab that data as you need it and bring it into a central repository. And like I said, for us, it was always Esri, and it was always, you know, let's tell the story through what everyone understands in real estate, which is a map, and let's bring all the data into something that can capture the various different data sets and the data points.
Yeah, and I was kind of hoping that you would go there because I do feel like there's a level of gravity with Esri where that makes sense. And it's hard to explain exactly why, but people respond in a certain way to a map. Our data scientist jokes that the Lord of the Rings would have been just fine if Tolkien had not created the map in the beginning. And I'm like, no, like it would have been, no, it would not have been at all. I couldn't have even understood the Lord of the Rings without the map. And I don't know exactly why maps like just like they lock on to people, but they do. And just putting a map there for some reasons it centers you. And I guess it's because we intuitively know that we maintain a latitude and longitude in our own little world. And then if it's like it centers you, it's like I see where Ohio is, so I feel like I know that's home, you know?
Yeah, and I think it allows you to, it's hard to visualize now with the technology, and you can, with everything from drones and, Google Maps and, Google Earth and all this other stuff, fine. But I think there's also this, like, it kind of always has brought you above and allowed
Mm,
you to kind of look down, to your point, right?
yes,
And connect dots in ways and visualizations that you probably wouldn't have connected if you were more 2D, if that makes sense. And I think
totally.
I think that's a big part of it as well. And I think now that you can you digitalized all of this, and now you can, click on a point and you can get all this other information off of it. And, you not only lat long, but you can get whatever you want, off of that pin in the map, right? And I think those things go a long way to allowing people to absorb that information and relate it to each other.
Yeah, yeah. Looking at a number on a page, it can be disconnected from reality, but when you look at it literally on a map, you feels like you're looking down into reality, which is
Well, and
just so much more tangible.
you can get a spreadsheet. Let's be honest, you can get numbers to kind of say whatever you want them to say to a certain degree, right? I think it's you can do that on this side of the equation too with the map, but I think in that case you're almost like you're just not telling the full story is the way you kind
Mm,
of get around it. But it's just I think there's more honesty. I know, and that's probably not a great word, but I do think there's more honesty in that visualization than, pure numbers, right?
yeah.
And looking at pure numbers, to your point, there's no context to those numbers in a lot of cases. So
I wish we had more time to dig into that more, but I want to hit mobile data and your view on next year before we kind of sign off here. I'm curious about your thoughts on that. So Oregon and Maryland have already enacted some regulation against mobile data. I mean, it's pretty much it's making it extremely imprecise. And I think Maryland is already it's enacted and it's in practice, and I think Oregon starts in January 1st. But how should we be looking at this as an industry? Is this one of those things? It's like everyone's going to lose it, so at least in these areas. So let's just keep using it and make it an advantage until we can't. Like, how do you think about how we will continue using this in the future?
so depending on how the regulations continue to shape up, Massachusetts has been hot and heavy on one, and they'll keep coming, right? And if you're looking at this data, right, and you look at the map of the US, you can't do something for one state, right? It's the GDPR argument, right? From all these companies that do business in Europe weren't going to have two different ways of doing things, so they
Mm-hmm.
complied to the GDPR and brought it this way, right? And just said we're going
Mm-hmm.
to have one set of standards. And
Hmm.
I think when you deal with mobile data, that's going to have to happen. I early on was convinced that it was going to therefore fade away and, we would go on to the next thing. I think companies are finding ways to work around some of this regulation, and I don't mean around in illegal or whatever, but more,
Yeah.
how do I continue to provide data while complying? And I think in doing that, what I think is going to happen, I think that samples are going to be less, and therefore extrapolation and the algorithms are going to have to stretch it further. And so you are going to have, you mentioned inaccuracy already of where they are. I think the inaccuracies are going to surface more than they have. That being said, I still think it probably is going to be better than a radius ring, a
Sure.
drive time, right? And so from that perspective, I think the hardest part is going to be, are these companies, that these data providers, going to market this like nothing's changed and cause all kinds of havoc? And if that happens, then I think the industry is going to bail on eventually on mobile
Mm,
data, because there's going to be too many big dollar errors, right? That people make decisions on. But I think if the companies are upfront of, okay, where we used to feel our accuracy was this, now it's this, where we are strong in this area, we're no longer strong. It's like, again, it's like where you say, I can't do verticality, right? I can't, you can't do verticality with mobile data. Those people that have those conversations and educate, I think it'll come through okay. It will just be less accurate and more extrapolated, and we'll have to take that into account and in the recipe that we create to make those decisions.
yeah. Yeah, it's kind of in a way a little bit unfortunate in the way it's going down because the way that we actually use it in retail real estate is in a very aggregated way. And what they're actually trying to protect against is individual use of mobile data, which does it is creepy, is when you see the ping, 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 and you can see like where the person is going, which is not at all in practice how it works, but it kind of like because it's cut down at the roots upstream, you can't use it for retail in the way that you would like to.
Well, and I think the biggest issue around mobile data came a few years ago when the industry was getting consolidated like crazy
Hmm.
and the repeat data was out in the marketplace. Still is to a large degree, but this repeat data where people were just almost making up pings and using last year's pings for this year and all the stuff that you know about. But I think that it dented into the accuracy somewhat and got people to pay more attention. I think the positive that came out of it is they paid more attention
Hmm.
to how everything works now. And so I think the industry is going to have to be honest about what these regulations mean going forward. And again, I don't think it's a bailout situation. I just think it's proceed with caution.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you guys want to dig into this a little bit more, Greg has written a really good article on this. What is it called, Greg?
Great question. I think it was like mobile data, is it the answer or is it something like that? Is it the answer or is it, the expensive question or something like
Yeah,
that?
I had a CEO of a very large retailer email me and is like, "Is this what I should be using to communicate about mobile data in my organization?" I'm like, "Yes, that is use that. That is the most succinct way." And it's got a good set of questions at the end of it for if you're not familiar with mobile data to ask your provider. That Greg has done a lot of thinking on going
No,
through.
I
So I'll
appreciate
just
that,
leave
and
it
it
there.
really was intended to educate, not call out anything or anybody. And I think because the data is awesome. I think it's proceed with caution, and I would say that about almost any data set, right? Proceed. You got to understand it. And proceed with caution, and make sure you know what you're getting yourself into.
100%. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about 2026. What do you feel like maybe just in 2025? What retailer have you been really paying attention to in 2025 that you've liked their moves or their strategy?
I I would say Costco.
All
Costco
right,
wins it
man.
for me, and I look at somebody that's been able to deal with all of this uncertainty in tariffs and everything else that goes with it and keeping prices low, but you're looking and you're seeing people continuing to purchase and renew memberships, right, to be part of what is a treasure hunt, what is low prices, what is you can get everything. The more you dig, the more you find I can get that at Costco, right? And they tend to break the norms. They have more
Hmm.
liberal return policies, more
Hmm.
liberal, product backing and warranty and support, And it's just amazing the culture that they've created and they've got a similar raving culture to like a Trader Joe's, right? And, here's this big warehouse that you would look outside and say it's unremarkable. Even inside to a certain degree, you get in there and it's like, okay, what's so special? Then you start digging in and it's amazing. And I think what they've done and how they've just continued to grow, continue to be smart about expanding, continuing to deal with the economic uncertainty. They're the retailer for me of 2025 and even a few years before that. And I think, you know, the low price guys that are out there that have done a killer job. And then, you've got the luxuries and the grocers and all this, and you've got ones in each category. They kind of combine it all, right? And then
Yes.
they just do a great job.
They're absolutely, absolutely fantastic. And we could do an entire podcast episode on them, and we will actually. We're gonna make it happen because I'm really nerding out on them as well.
It
I'm
was my
really
first, and
excited.
I not to deviate, and I know we're running short on time, but it was my first really aha moment with using mobile data back in the day. We did a Costco because we felt like it was a big location. The margin of error, and
Hmm.
this was early in mobile data, and we saw this path of customers going through Costco and how they hit the center where they keep all of the new stuff. Like, and we were able to go, oh my God, now we like this explains Costco with data and data points. And it was so cool. You just saw this, like the path, you saw the path through the store literally with mobile data. And it was
Yeah,
insane. It
yeah.
was really cool.
Costco did an anomaly for me, so it's pretty clear what their retail location strategy is. But they opened up a place in Flint, Michigan that is $40,000 lower than their median average income, and I think they got a lot of economic incentives to do it, tax credits, etc. And you can look in Google Maps around it, and there's a lot of brown where you can see they're doing development around that. So I think they're betting in the future, but they're also betting on a lower income demographic. And if they can actually win that particular demographic, to me, it opens up a huge part of the map for them because they've done really well, with average and like kind of like well educated, average above average income consumers. And this is not it. This is Flint, man. And if they can do well with that group, that's going to be huge for them in the U.S.
Agreed. Like you said, and what it does for the membership. And, then all of a sudden you start bringing them against things like the dollar stores and stuff of the
Hmm.
world, right? And it
Hmm.
becomes a very interesting one. And it'll be an interesting test to watch as that kind of proceeds forward.
Yeah. What topics should folks in our industry or market researchers have on their radar for 2026?
So I do think that understanding the regulations around mobile data that you mentioned before is one. I think from a data perspective, I'm seeing the new exciting baby, so to speak, is transaction data. I think it can be very powerful, but again, I think that there's an education needed because it is sample size is low, et cetera, right? And I think you get into it's reminding me of what happened with mobile data back in the day as before it started to surge. And I just think people should investigate and investigate diligently and cautiously. And I think certain uncertainty is kind of the other mode, which is question
Mm,
everything, understand what you're asking, why you're asking it, so that you can get the right answers. Because I think things will change rapidly in 26, and as they have in 25. And I think everything, a fad here and a fad there, and economic development here or there can change things at a dime. So you've got to be really, you know, flexible and willing to relook at whatever, data decisions you're making on a dime. So you've got to be flexible as you go into 26.
rock on, man. Yeah, on the transaction, that's kind of inspiring to me. Twice in the past week, I've seen someone use our transaction data, and I would say in a very wrong way. So we can look at the revenue share across segments for any brand, but then you can also look at the average ticket size or how much people spend per year. And I've seen twice now people use average ticket size as like, oh, we need to go after these people because they have the highest average ticket size. But those people don't make up a huge portion of the revenue, and often it will actually be high income rural people. And the reason is because those rural people are literally making a trip, and so they don't have a lot of opportunity to transact with that
Yep.
retailer, low base
Yep.
size. When they do, they're spending a ton of money. And it's like, that's not your customer. Hermes, that's not your customer. It's just like they happen to have a high ticket size because it's like a big purchase for them that they got to travel to. And it's like, man, we got to be careful, and we got to be the people that were you talking about, this is how you use the data. This is what is going to be the problems with this data set. I love that. That's really good.
But you get to a point, right, Lyden, where it's exhausting, but you're like, I can't stop this train anymore. And you hope you can by educating, et cetera. But people are going to use it how they're going to use it. But I think as long as you stay out in front and continue to educate and continue to inform and have the discussions, people are always going to, on those property flyers and everything else, it's always going to show the best, right? It's not going to
Hmm.
show any of the stuff that could in any way be construed as negative. But again, goes back to ask the questions, keep digging, understand why and what. And I think if people do that, it'll stop people from misusing the data because they'll get questioned away from it.
Fantastic. So let's finish here. I've noticed that a theme in your articles, and there's also something on your LinkedIn page. It says, "We live in a world that our questions create." That feels like a theme with you, Greg. So how do you think that applies to commercial real estate in 2026?
I think it's a little bit of what we've been talking about. I think it's if you narrow a lens and that's what you look at, and you look at this path forward, and you're going to find data that matches your vision, then you're gonna suffer on the other side of that. And I think the questions you create need to be, how do you support that vision? How do you support that path forward? How do you protect your flank, right? And make sure, and how do you manage your growth and all of those other things. I think it goes back to the questions that you ask and the willingness you are to look beyond your lens. You know, somebody, I think it was my grandfather, said you always hire people that are smarter than you, always. And because when you sit in the room and you look around, you should be like, I'm the stupidest one here, and you do that because of the value that it brings, and they know the stuff you don't know, right? And it's the same thing. If you don't ask the questions, you're not going to know, and you're going to make decisions based on, you know, really what ends up being bad data or guesses or something that was no better. And think the last piece of that is use AI smartly. AI is not the answer. AI is part of the path to get to the answer, maybe more efficiently and expeditiously. But AI is not the answer and should not be a substitute for what we do, local market knowledge that the brokers possess, et cetera. It just should.
You know, Douglas Adams, A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there was a part of that where they built this AI to find out the meaning of life. And then the answer was 42. And they were like, that's why? And then the AI said, you didn't ask the right question. Greg,
That sums.
that sums it up. I always feel energized talking to you. This has been awesome. If people wanted to follow up with you and learn more about what you do at Esri or more about you, where do they go?
They can go to me, Gregg Katz. They call me 3G as my nickname because it's GREGG, but it's 3 G's in there, but it's Gregg Katz on LinkedIn, or you can email me at gkatz@esri.com. Always love to talk to people and always love to further the geospatial insights and knowledge.
Rock on. Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.